Great. Well, thank you all for being here for day 2 of the New Voices Festival digital edition, now with more Zooming. And I just want to thank so much everyone who was here yesterday. It was a remarkable thing to have so much nervous anticipation about what would happen to the festival not being live, to have at its top maximum number about 118 people join us. Clearly about 4 of them were trying to get to hot yoga and they disappeared very quickly, but we maintained over 100 for the whole time, which I think set a New Voices record. And brought a lot of joy to Eleanor and I, to our student directors, and to our student guides. So thank you for that. And thank you to our students who did wonderful introductions yesterday. Thank you to Jalen, who emceed the event so professionally and beautifully. And thank you to the writers who just offered us such amazing readings. It was really a lovely evening and one that gave me enormous amount of sort of warmth and happiness in a time that has felt pretty low. It is a wonderful kismet that today is Dia de Sant Jordi in Barcelona and Catalunya, which translates more globally to World Book Day, if you've seen that hashtag run around. But in Barcelona, it means that all day people were running around buying books and giving them to loved ones. And you give a book and a rose, and all bookstores have giant sales, and it's a pretty amazing day. And I think that New Voices and the writers that we have gathered here today are giving us a great gift by giving their time and coming to talk about this really interesting subject matter for our panel today, literature in the time of Corona. Where yesterday we had our student assistant director MC the event. Today, Jordan Gallant, our student director, will be running the whole show on the panel, and she'll explain to you what's coming up. But I want to give it over to my partner in crime, the novelist and professor, Eleanor Henderson.
Well, thank you, Professor Holmes. And thank you all for joining us tonight. It's really nice to see everybody kind of relaxing into the festival on the second night. I want to remind everybody, if you haven't had a chance to browse and buy our authors' books, please be sure to go to buffalostreetbooks.com. We'll put the exact URL that will take you to the page in our chat. The festival is free and open to the public, but we want to support our hard-working authors, as well as our hard-working local, independent, cooperative bookstore as much as we can in these times. So please check out their books. I also want to look ahead to tomorrow night, the third and final night of the festival. We are going to be sharing with you a musical collage being composed by our own Kira Skye, who has been a student guide in past years and now is part of this central student team for the festival. And it's been a really special event that has grown from the first year, from the inspiration from just one poet's work, to last year when we had a collaboration from students in the theater arts department and the music school, all working together to share the words of all of our authors. And so we'll have something similar this year, but I'm really excited to see what Kira comes up with, especially given the kind of unusual constraints and possibilities of these digital days. So that's tomorrow night at 5:30. Hope to see many of you there. Jalen is the student assistant director who you met last night. Kira we'll see tomorrow night. And as Chris said, Jordan has the floor tonight. Normally we schedule 4 panels every year with about 4 or so writers each. But this year we really wanted to hear from all 7 of our authors. So it'll be a crowded stage. But I think appropriately so. The only other time that we did this with all of our authors was in 2017 with Literature in the Age of Trump, we are, of course, still in that age, and perhaps at a comparable moment of acute creative crisis when it makes sense, I think, to gather together and talk about how we might move through it together. All of our students all semester have been reading the work of our authors and drawing really meaningful connections between them and asking questions that feel all the more heightened now. And Jordan, our student director, has been taking copious notes all along, and I think she's really the perfect person to lead this conversation with our authors. So Jordan, please take it away, and if the rest of us want to close our screens by stopping our video now, I think that might create the most panel-like atmosphere for us to see our authors and our moderator.
Thank you so much, both Eleanor and Chris, for that lovely introduction. Hello, just to reiterate, I guess, my name's Jordan Gallant, and I'm a senior documentary studies and writing double major. I've been serving as this year's student director for the New Voices Festival, and in this venue will be moderating this pseudo real-life panel in whatever capacity I can with all of these lovely authors. As we get into this panel, as Eleanor was saying, if I could please entreat everyone to mute their mics and also their video, at least for the beginning portion as we go through some pre-prepared questions. And then when we open up the floor for audience Q&A, I would love if you use either the raise hand function here on Zoom or chat feature to ask those questions, and we'll make sure to distribute and direct those to the appropriate authors once we get to that point. So as Eleanor was also mentioning, going into this 8th year of New Voices, I don't think any of us expected the type of global crisis that ended up happening. I think that's fair of everyone to say. And during our 2017 festival, we experienced a national crisis that also motivated us to address more of the political landscape and its influence on writing at that time, and even into the future from that point on. So it only felt appropriate to address what was driving our festival to an online format and what would inevitably influence this literary world that we're all so involved in. So how this panel will work is there will be a series of pre-prepared questions that I have kind of tried to figure out for all 7 of you guys. And then we will open up the floor for the audience and allow people to, again, use chat or raise hand to ask their questions. If an author wants to answer the question in particular, or if while someone's talking, you feel a stroke of inspiration, feel free to use the raise hand function as well, and we can kind of flip-flop and I'll direct as we go along. So just to refamiliarize everyone with who will be participating in this panel, I just wanted to list out all of our authors and their general genre. We have Alexandra Chang, a novelist, Elizabeth Lindsay Rogers, a poet, CJ Hauser, a novelist, Nomi Stone, poet, Brendan Mathews, novelist, Andre Perry, essayist, and Jonathan Spector, playwright. All right, guys. So my first question comes kind of out of this realization that most of us as creatives, there's like 2 camps of people right now. There's the people who are saying, quarantine, this is the time to write your novel, write your script, write the movie, and do the thing you've always wanted to do. And then there's the realists who are saying, well, real life doesn't stop. We're professors, we are parents, we are students. We can't just use this time to work on our passion projects. So I guess to play into that tension, have you been writing? Or how are you managing the expectation to write? Elizabeth, I saw you unmute your microphone first. I don't know if you maybe want to take a stab at that for me.
Okay, so I'm happy to go first. For me personally, I have spent most of this year parenting my son full-time. So this has not been a particular time of productivity in the writing sense, if you want to think of it that way. I do think it's interesting that there is so much emphasis on this being a productive versus a non-productive time. I think that really speaks to just how entrenched our society is on the value of labor, which is something I could go into deeply for a long time. But I'm trying to, when I have a minute, I'm trying to kind of scribble in between activities, but I'm not doing it for the sake of production. I'm doing it to remind myself of where I am and what's going on, if that makes sense. It's kind of like a mindfulness thing. And I'm sure everybody's experience of this is different.
For sure. CJ, you were nodding along a little to that. Anything you'd like to add?
I just love what you're saying about productivity and labor, and I think I've had any number of people remind me helpfully that Shakespeare wrote Lear in quarantine, and I'm very close to going on a murderous rampage if that happens again, because I think, like, yes, there is this time, and yes, it looks more like, I guess, what we imagine is ideal for writers, but I also think that, I mean, at least for me, any projects that I had going before this, there's this new ingredient that's been thrown into the mix of what the world looks like and feels like, and I don't know how to write any of those things anymore with that new ingredient just yet. Like, it's gonna take time. So I'm still making pages because that is, like, I am an animal and that is what I do, is I make pages. But it's a strange time, and I agree that the pressure to be productive is a little tyrannical.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something that CJ said about this whole Shakespeare wrote Lear in quarantine. I guess it's worth bringing it up because it's Shakespeare's birthday today. One of my classes, I'm still teaching, my classes are all being taught remotely like this on Zoom. And I'm teaching this class on experimental narratives. And one of the students said last week, she said, oh, everybody, this whole Shakespeare and Lear and quarantine thing, she said, we shouldn't feel any pressure about that because that wasn't Shakespeare's first quarantine. So we should think of this as our first quarantine. And like, this is a gimme, this one's a gimme, but the next one we have to get stuff done. And I couldn't tell if that was like the most heartwarming thing, like, oh, this is only our first quarantine, doesn't count. Or if it was crushing to hear that, oh, this is somebody who's 18, 19, already thinking about how this might become a feature of her life. And this is somebody who, at a young age is already really invested in herself as a filmmaker, as an artist, as a creative, and she's trying to think about how is she gonna incorporate those desires with the way the world seems to be moving. But like everybody else, I'm not doing, this is always a tough time, like this point in the semester in particular, and this point as a parent, to get a lot done. And the move to online has meant that the work has accelerated, is maybe more present than usual. So this doesn't feel like time off. It doesn't feel like, this doesn't feel like endless weeks at Bellagio or wherever that writers go to disappear from their responsibilities and get things done. And any writing I'm doing is not about what's happening now. It's more just to keep a reminder to myself that that's an important part of who I am, and I need to keep it exercised rather than just to shut it down and try to get through one day to the next.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I think this kind of tendency to romanticize isolation and quarantine forgets like how much energy it takes to pay attention to what's happening around us right now, and experiencing just like the terror of American politics and people's differential vulnerability is like about as much as I can do. I think I have mostly been focusing on like just sort of the daily, like the garden, and I got a new dog and things like this. And I am doing the grind, which is I'm writing a poem a day, but it usually comes out as sort of like a line at midnight or at like 11:59 when I'm about to kind of collapse into bed. And so like a wondering that like maybe something will be cobbled together later, but right now, no, not really.
I think that's all completely fair. And I'm kind of latching on to something CJ was mentioning too in her follow-up to Elizabeth, which was, you know, the things that you were already parsing out now not fitting in with what is happening around you. It's so hard to maybe revisit the things that you were so curious about, you know, a month ago and now be in this different headspace. So that leads me to another question I have is maybe then before this all happened, where was your writing coming from? What place of curiosity was it coming from? And maybe given right now, is that going to feed into that further curiosity, or are we in this roadblock stage where we're just trying to survive? It's a little loaded, I know. Jonathan, I saw you raising.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can speak to where my writing was coming from before this. I mean, I sort of sometimes feel like it's better not to delve too deeply into that. But I do feel like, you know, we will all be responding to this at some point in the future, and it'll be impossible not to. But while we're in the middle of it, I think we don't know what the experience is enough to be able to do that in any kind of coherent way. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about how, you know, writing plays in particular, like theater is a time-based medium. And this time, and right now feels like we're just unmoored from time altogether. Like, I don't know if we've been in this for a week or a year, and and the endpoint could be any time. And that there's something about sort of floating in that space that makes it impossible to sort of grasp on to what's happening in a way to sort of nail it down and write about it. At least for me. I mean, I think of, I'm sure this is true more widely, but I know most, especially with theater, like there were a bunch of, I remember all of the sort of like response to 9/11, and there was sort of a lot of stuff that came immediately after it, and most of it was terrible. And then it was sort of sometime after that we started to see sort of plays that were reckoning with that time in a more sort of processed and nuanced way, and that we could sort of make sense of it. And which is not to say that like the immediate response is also important and useful and necessary. It's just maybe not going to be the sort of best or richest art.
I just read Ling Ma's novel Severance, which was sort of written about this before this somehow, if time is getting super loopy. And I think it's a book that could not, right now, no one would publish it, but thank God they did right before now, because it gave me a lot to think about in terms of which are the daily activities that still persist in a time like this that we are glad for, and what are the things that are persisting, like malls, that maybe we wish would stop persisting during a time like this. So if anyone wants to lean into thinking about now via a novel, I recommend Severance wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I think there's so many ways that, you know, Jonathan mentioned this need to respond, or at least this sense that people turn to, as much as people turn to artists and like, okay, process this for us. And that's really hard to do in the moment. That there was a rush of post 9/11 novels that came out. Maybe the first rush wasn't the best. But there are these books that came out before which seemed like they were written for the moment. So I think Severance is one of those right now. I think that I remember reading Waiting for the Barbarians after, like in the year after 9/11, and thinking like, oh, this is a book about 9/11. And it seemed like the best book about that post 9/11 moment, and the fear and the paranoia and the willingness to find enemies anywhere. And it was written in the late 70s, but it felt like, okay, this is a book about now. So I think in some ways, you know, I've been trying to read a lot and find things that are helping me to process a bit. And it's it's kind of haphazard. Like I'll read, there are passages that just feel very different. I was reading Jenny O'Phill's book Weather early on in this, and there's a moment where she mentions going to a yoga class or meditation class. And I thought, you can't do that anymore. Like, what are you doing? Like, how, you're not supposed to do that. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, this book is written in her reality, not in our reality. But there was something that's so immediate and fresh about the voice that she uses that I was concerned on her behalf, the narrator's behalf, that she would be in a room with 20 people.
Yeah, I think too, I want to switch gears maybe a little bit and acknowledge the space and the community we're interacting with here, the literary community, and how, you know, a lot of things have not stopped as a result of what's going on. I'm thinking of Alexandra and the release of your book and kind of needing to continue along your book tour, but in this virtual way. So throwing this out to you, and also Andre, I'm thinking of the comments that you made when you both came into class. Alexandra, your book coming out, but Andre, for you, the silver lining of this was making you, in whatever way, was how you were more aware of work that was coming out and maybe engaging more with your fellow writers. I don't know if either of you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, having a book come out, you know, right in the middle of the pandemic was really strange. All of my events were canceled, of course, but now, you know, there are these alternatives like these virtual events. So that's been heartening to like be a part of and to see like the literary community sort of think of new alternatives and to think of new ways to like reach readers, and also to like rally for all of these books that are coming out right now. That initial disappointment, I mean, I sometimes still feel that. Of course, I would love to be in like a room in person, like with all of you. And there are still aspects of like, you know, hanging out afterwards, after an event like this and chatting and like really getting to know one another in person that isn't possible right now. But being able to be a part of these kinds of events have been nice as a debut author who has never experienced anything, you know, not only the experience of like having a book come out, but also, of course, like having a book come out during a pandemic, which is not something I ever thought would happen.
And I know, oh, sorry. I know.
I was going to say, I know Andre also was at like the tail end of his events too.
Yeah, it's definitely weird, as we were talking about the other day, to like be in this state where there's a system and things are supposed to happen a certain way, and then it just absolutely stops. And you have to refigure out how do you engage the world when the regular platform or format has been disrupted. Same time, just I'm sitting back and trying to think about what are the ways in which literary culture, the way in which writers engage, publishers engage, festivals, conferences, what are the things we can do differently and carry forward once we're hopefully out of pure crisis mode or pandemic mode and we return to something that is not normal, but is maybe the new normal. This is like a really open time for radical innovation in culture, in everything really, but like in how we present, absorb, and share art and literature. And so I hope collectively, all of us who are participating in this as listeners, as writers, as students, as administrators, that we somehow take away a few amazing notes over the next 6, 12, 18, 20, however many months it is. I hope we come out the other side with some really innovative ideas.
This brings me kind of to, like, Andre, your point brings me to another thought that I kind of was having as I was reading all of your works. I think more than ever, the tendency for authors to experiment within their own genre seems heightened, seems more commonplace. As lives are messy, it's hard to just do the same thing over and over again. I know, Andre, your thoughts are always, how can we shake this up, and maybe how can we eradicate binaries? And I think right now in your discussion of what might come out of this moment is the choice of all writers and of all creatives to either lean into older structures or use this as a chance to shake it up. So maybe how does your own genre, like relationship with the structures of your genre, you know, exist within your writing, and maybe how could it change, do you think?
I can start that, even though I don't want to take up too much space. So I think us playing around with genre as writers, as artists, and playing around with form, if we choose to do that, has been something has been pushed along just with like the advances in technology, the way that even like super popular platforms like Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or TikTok, whatever it is, kind of force us to like put ideas in different formats. And I think that breeds back into the writing or other art we might do. And I think a real big event like this, like a pandemic that just totally disrupts everything, can just really accelerate that sort of experimentation overnight, even if it's been kind of like underneath us the whole time, or kind of bubbling up. It just kind of like breaks open the lid and people can flow out. Then again, some people might just like stay traditional, you know, and double down on that.
I think.
Oh, go for it, Nomi.
Okay. I have been thinking a lot about time and simultaneity, and like the idea of a global event, which I think in some senses is real, and in other senses is kind of a fantasy, because people are just experiencing this differently in different spaces, you know, and there are questions of power and class and race, and all these things are going on that make people more fragile than others. But so if we're in this simultaneity that's not simultaneous, how do we reach across to each other and create intimacy, and also not assume anything about other people's lives and experiences? And I do think that we do need form to break out of these things. I'm working on a new collection of poems right now that is trying to, I think, break out of at least the forms I've inhabited in the past. I'm an anthropologist as well as a poet. My first two collections of poems are really, they hew to fieldwork that I've done within like a very strictly anthropological context. And I'm trying now to write a book of poems that lets the world be fieldwork, lets all things that are lived be part of the ambit rather than closing off. And so that's an experiment in some sense. For me, it's pushing out of the comfort zone I've been in for probably 15 years. And it's a way to try to write something more intimate and less afraid, I think.
I mean, I'll say it, you know, it's a really strange time for people who make theater, because you can't really do the fundamental thing that's needed for that, which is to gather in a space with other people. And so I think everybody is sort of trying to figure out what that means, and what is it, what are things that you can make sort of with this technology, and what is that experience? I mean, there's a lot of attempts right now to sort of transfer plays into some kind of digital format, which is, I think, not, you know, has its limitations. And I think there are big questions kind of about whether sort of when, if ever, the theater is coming back, and if we're, you know, and so I think what kind of writing you can do sort of in this space is something that everybody I know is wrestling with. Everybody I know who writes plays, and I don't think we have any answers yet.
Just responding, going off of that, I think it's important to recognize, you know, on the one hand, the pandemic has allowed for these kind of opportunities for example, readings that are these very democratic spaces where you get people from all different situations and, you know, all over the place coming together. And that's like a really wonderful thing that isn't possible, right, in other mediums. But I also have been trying to be really conscious of what is not recreatable, right, in a digital format. And I've had to sort of reconcile with the fact that, you know, I was supposed to be on a book tour this spring, for example. My book came out in mid-February. But I've had to reconcile that, you know, this is not actually the time for that, right? And so instead, I'm trying to spend my time doing things that are possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot. I mean, as a short story writer, as a novelist, and as all of us, I mean, as we all engage with narrative in different ways in the shaping of narrative. And I think that, I guess it didn't take the pandemic to make me aware of this, but maybe it's because of the daily drumbeat of press conferences and the headlines. But the power of storytelling and the way that, and who gets to shape the story, I think is visible to us every day right now. You know, back in the 80s, Reagan was hailed as the great communicator, and he was a storyteller. He told a story about the country that found a lot of listeners and that shaped a lot of the policies we still have right now about who matters and who the government serves and who it doesn't and all the rest. And I think that right now we're also at a moment where there's a narrative that's being told that we're witnessing, and that I guess one of the things I'm wrestling with is what role do we as writers and as people invested in narrative and as artists have in trying to shape a new narrative. I mean, it's not just a pandemic year, it's an election year, but I don't think that the narrative gets written just by who we vote for in November. I think that there's a necessary investment of energy in trying to rewrite a story that feels like it's gone astray in a lot of ways, about who matters and, you know, who the government serves and who's not being served and who's bearing the weight of the pandemic right now. And as somebody who frequently has a very long, long gestation for anything that I write, like trying to engage with the world as it is in a particular moment, that's something I'm struggling with, is how to play a role in some awareness of how to rewrite the narrative, how to push it in one direction or another, how to have that heard beyond the group that may go into an independent bookstore and buy one of my books. Like, are they the ones that most need to hear it? Like, I don't know. That's something that I'm really acutely aware of and wrestling with. And partly it's the political scene, partly it's, you know, our oldest is a high school senior this year and has kind of had a real political awakening of her own over the last couple of years and is constantly calling her parents and our generation and the generations above us to account for the things that we have left her generation to deal with. So when I think about narrative and story and genre and all these things, there's a necessary engagement with the world that I'm trying to find a place for myself in.
I think in different capacities, all of your works really play into the sussing out of that question in some degree. And maybe it is not a political power directly, but I think all of your works, whether it be Nomi's Kill Class, the rift between reality and fiction, and to what degree are we straying into each, when you're talking about your field work, Elizabeth with Till Torn Away, the concept of moving to Mars and climate change, again, this very real thing and also this very abstract thing. Jonathan, vaccinations and Eureka Day, school, and trying to appease and settle these rifts. I think all of you are acknowledging these shifts and these rifts between people, whether that be groups, whether that be individual relationships within your work. So I wonder, when it comes to writing and when it comes to your question, Brendan, is writing the best tool for mediating these? Can it help us mediate them? Can it help us understand them? I don't think we'll ever get to an understanding, but maybe we can get close. Andre, I see you nodding. I don't know if that's just out of kindness or if you have a thought, maybe?
Could you maybe repeat the question? I'm having a hard time.
Yeah, of
there's
course.
there's a lot of threads here.
Yes, I think that's completely fair. Does writing have a role in helping us mediate the rifts between different people? And that could be generational too.
Do you know, maybe this is sort of a Pollyanna-ish answer. I mean, I think that it can't be the only thing a person does, or maybe I should just speak for myself and say, if I felt like the writing was the only thing I was doing, I would feel incompletely involved in the causes that I care about and what's happening in the world. But I will say that as a teacher, I have seen books change people's minds on a variety of issues that sometimes on a dark day I think are sort of intractable, and either you're open-minded about them or you're not. Weirdly, the book that I remember doing that the best was Let the Right One In, which is like a Scandinavian vampire book, which I love a lot and taught in a monster lit class. And I had a student who was just a really small town Southern conservative business student, and he was very confused about this genderless vampire for a long time. And by the end of it, he really came to a place through a vampire novel of being a little bit more open-minded about gender identity and what it meant, and then who you loved and all of these things. And so, is it the be-all end-all tool that we have to use? No, but can a book do a little bit of good? Sometimes, yes.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Yes, to all of this. The book that I read most recently that did that for me, and it didn't dissolve or mediate these rifts exactly. It just helped me both imagine and otherwise, and to see the rifts more clearly. But Natalie Diaz's Post-Colonial Love Poem, which is an extraordinary book of poems. And it's about an America of great historical and genealogical violence, but also what does it mean to keep undertaking acts of tenderness and love amidst that. And so that book has stood out for me. Right now, my wife and I have been working on this essay, this kind of epistolary essay together for a year actually, and we're just finishing it. And it is about this really basic unit of self and other, right? Like this loved and beloved, right? But also the gap between you, and we've been married only a year, and so togetherness and also solitude, and how we find each other through language. And language is our mode, because she's a fiction writer and I'm a poet. And so this has been a way for us to know each other more deeply, and to know the world more deeply that way too, I think.
Thank you for entreating all my cryptic, very large questions, all of you. I'm going to start inquiring some from our audience, and I have one to kick us off from Mary Ryan. Has there been anything unexpectedly fun or useful since sheltering in place?
Like just fun in general, or like related to my not writing?
I feel like you could take that in any way that feels most productive, maybe in general. I think we talked a lot about the writing part.
I mean, I recognize that, here at home, we're really lucky. My wife and I are both working from home, and our kids are all around. Our oldest is 17, almost 18, and our youngest is 11. So we're all here in this kind of little colony at home. And we're lucky, like we're working and nobody's sick, and that's great. So whatever I say that sounds like a complaint isn't. And one of the things we've been doing, like I hope that things get back to normal-ish, and that we look back on this time and we're like, what a gift it was that we got to spend this time together, when the kids were all in the house and our kids like us and we like them. And so that's nice. And we've been watching a lot of movies, and we made a list early on when the lockdown kind of first started of things to see. And it's a kind of haphazard study through film, and just to find things that, it's hard to find a movie that 6 people can like. And we found like old movies, like It Happened One Night, the Claudette Colbert movie, which, even our teenagers found. Like our daughter, who's can be a tough critic, said, I feel like this was the funniest movie that was made for the next 70 years. And like, movies are just getting this funny again. And I was like, oh, thank God, rather than storm out of the room for some reason. And so we've done that. And I taught my kids to play poker. I feel like that's a valuable life skill. But right now they've been playing with we have a jar full of coins. And so they bluff all the time because it's not their money, it's house money. So I'm gonna have to start making them play with their own money. That feels productive to have learned that about them, that they'll gamble away someone else's money, but maybe they'll be stingier with their own.
One fun thing that I've been doing, and this is something that I probably didn't do enough of before the pandemic, is order a lot of books from like various independent bookstores across the country, since they're all delivering now. So I've been like ordering like 2 to 4 books from each one, and they sort of arrive at the house at various times, depending on like, I don't know where they're being shipped from. So it's been kind of fun to just like receive these packages and be like, oh, it's all these books that I've ordered. And it feels very like luxurious to be, I guess, and I am lucky too that I can do that, order just like luxurious to order all of these like hardcovers and like books that maybe before I would not have taken as much time and like effort to do. And another thing that I've been doing is playing Animal Crossing. I know that's like a very popular game right now. My sister sent me a Switch, which was very nice of her. So I've gotten into that. Talk about like our obsession with productivity. I do think Animal Crossing sort of satisfies that like feeling of having done something with a couple hours.
There are 2 things that I wanted to mention. One is like kind of like an altruistic, like do-gooder answer, and the other is like completely self-indulgent. So the do-gooder thing is that I've been Venmoing small amounts of money to random people that I know, mostly people who are freelance musicians and dancers, right? Because those are people, for example, who are getting really hard hit by this. And that as long as I can do that, I'm going to continue to do it. So that's my like, good for the community answer. My other answer is that I've been binge watching Gossip Girl between 11 p.m. and midnight almost every night. And that's like really when I need to be sleeping because I have a small child. And I think Gossip Girl is pretty much the opposite of giving money to people who need it. It's about the 1%. So I don't really know what that says about me. I'm gonna kind of let you figure it out.
I guess two things. One is I feel like I've gotten out of a cooking rut a little bit, whereas I'm trying to only make things I've never made before when I cook, rather than just cycling through the same dishes over and over, which has been great and gives you something to sort of look forward to in the week. Like I'm gonna make this exciting new dish, and differentiate one day from the next. I also, I mean, I've been writing sort of in fits and starts and mostly not, but have had some brief windows when I have been able to, and have felt a certain kind of freedom to know that, you know, like a play I'm working on that's a commission for a theater, that, you know, this theater might not survive. They might not be here in 2 years when theaters open up again. So I don't have to worry about writing a play that I think they're going to feel like is good for their audience, and sort of just allow myself to just write purely from a place of fun, which is maybe what one should be doing all the time, but it is easy to kind of get away from when you feel like people have expectations about what you're doing. But I struggle to hang on to that freedom for very long.
I got a puppy, and it was a thing that was under consideration for a while, but then I read that a lot of dogs had been abandoned, at least in Dallas recently amidst the pandemic. And so I was like, okay, now's the time. And so we got this puppy, and it's really delightful, and he has so much energy, and it's been really good because I have like a surplus of kind of energy myself that I don't know what to do with. Like extra kind of energy and extra sociability that aren't being like funneled into normal activities. Like usually I have like an hour commute each way, and usually I have all these things, but now I'm just kind of jumping around with this puppy. So that's really great.
I want to hop in to say, first of all, that I hope you bring your puppy tomorrow night, because I really want to see it.
The puppy has been like around the perimeter both nights. I'll try to make the puppy visible.
The puppy energy is there. And the other thing, which is possibly oversharing, is that I had recently decided to start dating again, and then now it's like, what are you doing? But I met a person. I have never met this person in real life, and now perhaps I never will. But our dates have been watching movies on the phone together, which has been so lovely and strange, and makes me feel like a teenager, where you like actually can't go on another kind of date because you have no money or rides or anything. And I think it's a really lovely and strange way to interact with a new person. And I don't know, worst case scenario, we're a real like Mystery Science Theater 2000 duo. And so good things have come of this in terms of different ways of interacting with new people.
That's lovely.
Another question that I've received is, rather than a desert island list, what is your quarantine island list of books? I know some titles have been thrown around, but I don't know if anyone else would like to contribute to that.
No, I mentioned earlier, I'd finished Weather earlier in the, I guess right when the pandemic started, and I'm reading Yoko Ogawa's Memory Police right now, which is fascinating, and another one of those books that feels like it was written for now, although it only came out a year or so ago. But The Memory Police has been getting me through, although it's this strange world, but it also feels very, I don't know, it feels very real, and it's nice to slip into that other space whenever I open that up.
Paige Lewis's poems, Space Struck, came out, I think, earlier this year. And I've been rereading them because of the way they're so personal, but they're so about big things at the same time, that they feel like correct and okay to be reading right now, because they're giving me the personal thing I need without feeling like they're ignoring bigger things.
I wanted to recommend Brian Tier's Doomsday Days. Can you see that? Yeah. If you are interested in climate change and thinking about the Anthropocene, this is a beautiful, beautiful book. And I especially like what he's doing visually with his poems. This is quite large, you see, for a poetry book. And he's really using the field of the page in an interesting way. So this is a good read. It came out last year. I've been a slow reader this year, parenting a small child.
I also want to put in a plug. I know we're talking books mostly, but early on, like the first week of being locked in, we binged our way through Cheer on Netflix. And it's become a catchphrase in the house now to have like, who's your Jerry? Everybody needs a Jerry in their life. And Jerry's the person when you get good news, he's as excited as you are, maybe more excited than you are for your good news. So I think that especially during this time, everybody needs to figure out who their Jerry is.
I live an hour away from Navarro College, and so my wife and I took a road trip there.
Wow.
Before all this, but they were on spring break or maybe on tour, so we didn't see them. I also love Cheer.
That's huge.
I have a question here from Jasmine. What is something you wish to see in future writing after this pandemic?
I'll try to jump in there and get this started. I think there might have been silence because it's like such a massive question, which is great. But it's like, I just want to think about that. I don't want to talk about that. But a few of the things that are on my mind are that, and maybe this is just like reflecting what I said earlier, is just that I think this disruption has like thrown a lot of institutions and a lot of practices into question or into disarray. So I'm interested in how like connected institutions or practices might realign in the future. For example, this whole festival is happening because of really amazing administrators at a school who are working with really amazing students who are bringing writers and community together to happen. And like universities and colleges have always been like a really positive home for writers, you know, writing departments, creative writing, English departments, other studies in the humanities. And so as universities and colleges are going to have to like think how they realign or reform or break away and become, you know, new spaces. And so how will that affect the relationship with writers, right? And in my day job, I work at an arts organization. Some of us are going to make it, some of us are not going to make it. And how will we re-engage with artists? What roles will writers play in the work of performing arts centers, of small theaters, of festivals? So I don't know if I have any answers or know what I really want to see, but I just hope that some of the reformations of these relationships and the way that different presenters and homes for art and for writers, I hope they reform in cool ways that allow more people to find community in this work.
I haven't totally formulated this, but I was just thinking about touch and contact and intimacy, and how much I miss it actually. And I'm lucky I have, you know, a pet and a wife and whatever, but the kinds of forms of contact, like touching your friend on the shoulder, or these sorts of being next to people, adjacency. And so I want to think about and see in literature contact, and how do we reach each other? How do we contact each other and touch each other and feel each other, even through these crazy screens? I mean, maybe we can do it. Maybe we can feel something. I think we can. This has been a really lovely hour. So I guess it's that like potency of contact.
Anyone else want to try and answer that before we wrap up?
I've enjoyed how this has been sort of like Quaker meeting. Like we sit here in silence until someone is moved to speak, and then they do. It's been very it's different than the experience of most panels. I think silence is good. That's why there's so much blank space in my poems. Yeah.
I think I agree with the points that we've made, that Andre and others have said, that, you know, we should remember what we miss about this time and then really throw ourselves into it. I mean, all the things that we're saying, the arts organizations that matter to us, theater spaces. I mean, where I live here in the Berkshires, every summer we have the Williamstown Theater Festival and Jacob's Pillow and Tanglewood and all these things that just bring people here, but also there's just so much happening. And every week we find out about another one that's been canceled. Because they can't mount a season, or Williamstown Theater Festival is doing a deal with Audible to make those available for the ear, but not for the eye and for the rest of us. I just hope that everybody engages with those things as they are now here. It was incredible that yesterday there were 100 people at the reading. I wish there were 100 people every time I was present for a reading. And then once things are open again, like, go to stuff, like make good on all the things you're saying, like support the artists. There's a singer-songwriter who I like who's been doing living room concerts every Sunday. And I've been watching him Sundays at 1 or at noon and sending a few dollars his way on Venmo, just because he's out there doing his thing. So I think the exciting thing is, like, not so much what I'm looking forward to when all this is over, but I just want to see all the stuff I loved before this pandemic moment continue.
Yeah, I think that maybe related to what you're saying, I've seen so many people I know on social media sharing skills I did not know that they had, because everyone is sort of always performing their sort of main gig. And then all of a sudden my computer scientist friend is like doing this dance routine in her living room. And I didn't know that that was a thing that she did. And so I like that there's this sense that, like, we have inner resources and strangenesses that are also part of who we are, and people seem to be more generous with them right now than they normally have been, and that is a thing that's been bringing me joy, and I hope we keep it. I at least hope Jen, the computer scientist, keeps doing dance in her living room.
Yeah, and on the subject of things I hope we keep, I think a lot of people have been having this experience, have made a lot of contact with people that I have fallen out of touch with. I've been having regular phone calls with old friends. And then you wonder why you don't make that a part of your life more frequently, and hope that that's something that we can hang on to.
All right, I want to thank all of our authors and all of our audience members for engaging in such a fruitful discussion tonight. I encourage all of you to come back at this time tomorrow for the release of our musical collage, which will be composed by Kira Sky. It's going to be really exciting. Also consider visiting buffalostreetbooks.com and purchasing any of our authors' works. We could not be creating such wonderful literary spaces such as this without the love from our audience members here, as well as all of our authors. So I want to thank everyone for coming out, for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Hope to see you tomorrow.
Bye.
This is the part where we're all supposed to get a drink, right?
No.
Good night. Jeez.
BYOB tomorrow.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Definitely.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. See you tomorrow. Jordan, awesome job.
Thank you. I tried.
You did fabulous.
Here, Elizabeth, let me get you the link for the next event.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know why I don't have it.
No, I got you. That's what my job is for.
She's a good student director.
Here you go. So if you go here, it should be listed under musical collage, register here.
Okay, cool.
You know,
Thanks.
if that works or not.
All right, I'm going to end the meeting. Night,
Alrighty.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.